Hi everyone, Super Moisty Sugar. Welcome to my channel. Just a couple of days ago I completed a Woolies cake hack, which is a chocolate panel cake. Now when I went to pull the cake apart and throw it out, I sat and went, well hang on a minute, it's brand new cake, it's fresh, I'll just create it or make it into something else. So I can do another tutorial for you. So this is the result. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to know afterwards, please feel free to let me know and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
So as I said earlier, this cake I actually had created for you as a cake tutorial, and I went to throw it out and went, oh my God, the cake's only a day old. So let me see if I can create it into something else as a tutorial. So I spent a few minutes trying to figure out what I was going to do and just came across a little picture of a cute penguin. I thought, look, I'll give that a go. It's a shaped cake, and it will show you a little bit about cake design and how I actually carve my cakes. So I figured it was probably a good one to start with. Now, I've taken the basic cake. As you can see, I'm actually cutting away the chocolate ganache that I had put on this previously to get my shape. Now, when I'm creating any cake that is shaped, I do spend a fair bit of time just having a look at the shape and the design and just cutting it away as close as I possibly can. It's sometimes hard until you actually ice a cake properly in fondant to sort of see what shape you've ended up with. So what I did with this, as you can see, the top of the cake is not 100% as rounded as I would have liked. So I ended up adding a little bit of cake to the top and just coating the whole lot in chocolate ganache so I can just get that rounded head shape. With my ganache, you would have seen previously, I really just use plain Nestle chocolate and cream, and I typically use 1/3 cream to 2/3 chocolate. I get it so it's sort of whipped and it's pretty glossy. I figured that that looks quite nice, and that glossy sort of means. So with your ganache, the more crummy it looks, the drier it is. So you're going to need to put a little bit more cream in. So if you've got it glossy, you've got it pretty much perfect. So I use a rubber scraper, a plastic scraper here. And it's just it's a flexible tool. It curves nicely when you're trying to create a cake that's got rounded areas. And typically the whole idea with ganache is really just to keep going over and over and over your cake until you've got it about right. So I did obviously take a fair bit out, and I have sped the video up to 2/3 my normal speed because I'm sort of figuring that otherwise it's going to take us 5 hours to get through this tutorial. But you can see I spent a fair bit of time on the cake just getting it smooth. I usually leave it sit overnight, but in this instance I did it pretty much sort of half an hour after I'd finished the ganache. I'd let it sit for long enough, and then I moved on to filling in the face area, as you can see here. Also, what you can see is I do have it on an ice board. I did the ice board also previously and let it sit overnight so it does dry, and I've transferred the cake to that. Now, what we're currently doing is just taking some sugar paste, and when you look at a picture, I guess what you probably got to try and do is work out the raised areas that you want. And as with every face or every feature that you have, it's not flat. So I'm actually just creating here the nose and the cheeks and the areas where my eyeballs are roughly going to sit. Once I'm happy with that, as you can see now, I've rolled out my fondant, and we're going to lay that over the top of the cake, and then we'll work on some more detailed features later on. So I have actually just used some water to dampen the cake. However, you've got to be really careful that if you drop water onto your board, it can actually absorb the icing and leave holes. So try not to get it everywhere. A lot of people would use a bit of egg white, or you can just use some cake decorating glue or something of that sort. But I typically find that if I buy cake decorating glue, I tend to run out of it really, really quickly. And then I forget to buy more. So I just use water. It works for me. You could use a bit of vodka. Anything really to dampen the cake works. Now, with the fondant, I always find, even though I've rolled it out reasonably, or not thick, but sort of, a centimetre or so, it does stretch, and you'll find you'll have a lot of excess left over. So, which is fine. So now, with shaped cakes, you've got to make sure that your hands are not too hot. If your hands are actually too hot, it will soften the fondant a little bit too much, and you certainly won't get that nice shape. So just sort of make sure that you're in a cool space, your hands are not too hot. Touch as least as possible if you do find that's a problem. You can see that I've just used a pin. I often get air bubbles. I think that's pretty common. So I'll tend to just use a pin just to get rid of the air bubbles, and I always actually have a little bit of cotton on the end of my pin, so I actually don't lose it. Not that I've ever lost a pin before, but it's one of those horrifying thoughts that you go to use something and you're sitting there going, oh my God, where's my pin? And you've got to throw your cake out. So put a bit of cotton on the end, and it just makes it sort of pretty safe and secure. And if you want to even be more secure, you can attach the cotton to the end of your cotton roll. All right, so you can see I've finished with the actual putting the fondant on. I've cut it away, and I'm just shaping around the stomach area. We actually are going to airbrush this, but I do use it as a bit of a guide just to see that I've got the stomach roughly where I want it to be. We've moved on now to the feet. So I haven't used a template or anything. I've really just gone off the picture that I've got, and have just sort of really molded it. And you'll see here, again, I'm just going to stick it to the cake using a bit of water. However, in hindsight, this probably would have been a little bit better with something a bit stickier, so a little bit of egg white or something like that, or cake glue would have been better. The fondant is a little bit heavier, so I actually had to hold it for a couple of seconds for it to adhere properly. But anyway, look, it's all good. So, and you'll see in a minute that, yep, so here's my other foot, that I also do the same thing with the arms. Now, I haven't actually shown you that in this tutorial, simply because putting the arms on the penguin is exactly the same process as putting the feet on. So, so later on, you'll see that the arms suddenly pop on, but I didn't sort of feel the need to show that because it's the same process. I do use silver foil a lot in a lot of my cakes because it does create a really interesting indentation and pattern, gives a little bit of texture. So I sort of wanted to create the effect of a little bit of fur, well, not really fur, but just, penguins are not flat. So here we go. You can see that I've just put the arms on now. So I go around with my silver foil just to create that little bit of texture, and you'll see that I also use it later on in the hat, and I'll explain that to you when I get to it. So so what I'm doing now is I'm putting the eyeballs into the indentations, and I've just really watching the shape of the cake, and as you'll see, I've probably got my iPhone open on the bench, which I refer to from time to time, make sure I've got it right. So we're moving on now to the painting of the eyes. This is actually really quite simple. It was only a blue and black, and I use Wilton white. I was actually a little bit disappointed. The cake shop or cake supply shop that I normally go to didn't have it in stock, so I had to order 2 in from overseas. But I do use it a lot for my painting, and I'm sort of gotten used to it over the years. But there is different other whites you can use as powdered whites that you can mix with alcohol. But anyway, that's what I prefer. So with the eyes, what I've just done the outline first. And I just did the outline in a darker shade of blue, and I filled it in the actual eye itself with a pale blue, and then I'll put in some shading in a minute. I will now go through, as you can see, I'm highlighting the outer areas of the eyes with a darker black, and just going in and filling in the top of the eyes here now. So I tend to go over it a few times until I've got the shade that I want. When I first started painting on cakes, I mixed water with my paint, and that was a really, really big mistake because icing absorbs water, and it wasn't so. In effect, I would paint on the cake and it would look amazing, and I go, "Hey, that's super cool," and then I'd go and look at it the next day, and half the color had been absorbed. I'm like, "Oh, okay." Anyway, so do get a good vodka, something that dries pretty quickly and pretty pure. So that sort of helps out. With the white dots on the eyes, I've actually just used a few small balls of fondant, and really tiny, so it is a little bit tricky, but I've just used the end of my paintbrush and daubed them on to get them into the spaces I want. So what I'm doing now is I'm filling around the eyes with fondant. If your fondant has started to dry and you're trying to actually blend new fondant into the old fondant, you can actually tend to get cracks. It can tend to not adhere properly, or you can ruin the nice fondant that you have underneath. So a little bit of a trick here that I found is if I dampen my finger with the vodka and actually rub that over the surface of the cake, the surface of the areas I want to blend, it actually blends it really, really, really nicely. And you can rub the two pieces together. And it dries really, really quickly. So if you look at this, you can see that I've got a slightly glossy area, which is where I've actually rubbed it with the alcohol, as you can see I'm showing you. And but that does dry really, really quickly and gives you a really, really nice finish. You can see here I'm rubbing it in. You can also see that I put the nose or the beak on, and now obviously I've moved on to the hat. What I should have done here in hindsight, and I actually ran out of time, is I actually wanted a taller hat, but the problem with icing is it actually doesn't hold itself up. So the only way you can create something taller is if you either prop it up or use some sort of prop. And I think in hindsight, I probably should have gone and got myself some LCM bars, which are like Rice Krispies, and used that to create a taller hat. So it's edible, obviously, and then you could have just placed your fondant over the top of that, and that would have been much nicer. But in the end, I ended up having to put some more sugar paste on the top to create the dome shape for the fondant. But I guess the whole thing about cake decorating is actually just, I suppose, winging it. You'll come across scenarios from time to time, and you'll sit there going, "What am I going to do to fix this, or how am I going to create that?" So it's just being a little bit creative, and sometimes thinking a little bit outside the square, and also knowing that what you're going to do is not always perfect. A lot of my cakes are not perfect, and I swear I think the art of cake decorating is more around covering up your mistakes rather than making something that's perfect. So putting your mistakes to the back of the cake, and etc. etc. Okay, so now what we're doing, we're moving on to airbrushing. I'm not an airbrushing expert. I would like to say that now. It's something that I'm okay with shading. I'm okay with getting some details. But those people that do the wonderful airbrushing cakes or paintings or pictures or whatever they're doing is amazing. And I'm really not anywhere near that. So but I have learnt with airbrushing, you need to start off with a lighter shade, and you continue to colour over it until you get the colour that you want. And you can do various different colours. So, if you're wanting something purple, you can do a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, and you just colour it up until you get the shades that you want. So I tend to start quite light, and as you can see, this looks pretty patchy. But the more I work over this, the darker it actually gets, which is great. So what I tend to do with the airbrush is I outline the shape that I want first. So I've gone around and just merely outlined the colours, and then I start filling in. So I suppose it's a little bit like a colouring in book, where you just sort of do your basic shapes and your colours, and then you add to it to get the tones that you want after. With the eyes, I have airbrushed around the edges, but I probably I guess if you're not so good at that, perhaps a little bit of some paint and a paintbrush just to get the black around the actual outside of the eyes. You can also see, as I've got this on an ice board, a lot of people airbrush in airbrush tents, I suppose, and I don't typically worry about that. I do find I get a lot of airbrush here on the actual ice board, but as this ice board had some texture in it, what I did is actually use a little bit of water and wiped off the excess airbrush colour off the board later on, and you'll see at the very end pictures it just gave a really nice texture on the board. The feet you'll see here I'm doing in yellow and a little bit of black just to get some highlights, and I will go over it again in a minute with some egg yellow, so it ends up a slightly darker shade of yellow than lemon yellow. And as you can see, I've already done the nose. I'm currently doing a little bit of pink just to highlight the cheeks and around the stomach. At the very end of this, I wasn't happy with the amount of pink that was on this cake, on the cheeks. So I did end up using a little bit of petal dust, and you could use that as well. So petal dust with a bit of a just dusted on lightly can do the same effect as an airbrush. Again here, just basically some highlighting and working my way around just to get the shape that I want. So the thing here is again pretty much just finding the areas, so having a good look at your picture and finding the areas that are darker that sit in the background, and they're the areas that you need to continue to go over and over a few times. All right, so we've almost done that. Now we'll be moving on to the hat in a minute, and you'll see that again I do the same thing, but I've already on the hat I've actually already gone over and pressed in some silver foil to create some indentation. So you'll see that when I colour the hat, I'll just use some basic straight colours, but then I do dampen it with water. I always have some paper towel with me. And I took off a whole lot of excess colour. So really what happened is the colour I wanted just merely sat in the indentations, which gave a really, really nice hat effect. But again, just a word of caution that so here we go, you can see I'm just using a straight plain colour. Yes, so sorry. So just the word of caution is if you're going to use water on your paper towel, be careful not to wipe over anything else again, because it's actually really, really hard if you've dampened or got some water on your airbrushing areas and you've got to try and airbrush over it. So the only thing I did do after I finished recording this for you is I did actually make a little bee, which I haven't shown you. It's really, really very basic, and I just made it out of a little bit of black sugar paste and modelling chocolate, which I placed on the top of the hat, so he's looking at a little bee. And I did also paint on some really, really fine, just using some black colouring paste and a really fine paintbrush. I painted on some eyelashes, so you'll see that little final detail in the end picture. So I put the scarf on here, and in fact I probably put the scarf on about 5 times and didn't like it, took it off, put it back on, didn't like it. Eventually I got it, so I thought it looked all right. And in hindsight, I actually think I liked him better without the scarf, but look, in the end I think it worked out all right. So we've almost finished. You'll see a short video at the end of this as to what it looked like when it was fully completed. And as always, if you have any questions, I'm really happy to help with anything. So please feel free to come back to me. Or if you want to follow any further videos, feel free to like and subscribe. Here is an image of the cake when it was finished. Thank you very much for watching.